we have this misconception, this preconceived notion that when we have pain, it's because something is damaged or broken. That pain is a one-to-one response to hardware damage, right? Damage to the bone, muscle, tendon, ligament, disc, etc. And pain is not necessarily a one-to-one correlation with damage. Pain does not always mean damage. Pain is a response to perceived threat. And that perceived threat could be, it could be physical damage. It could also be, not getting enough sleep last night, being dehydrated, having an inflammatory reaction to food. Yes, there may be hardware damage, and yes, it may take time to heal. And a big part of the reason that it takes so long to heal, so long to recover, that people are in pain for a period of time, for a longer period of time, a big part of that reason is not necessarily the original damage, but the response to that. It's like many times in life, it's not as much about what happens to us as about how we respond to it.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Optimize Your Naʻau Podcast. My name is David Woodward, and this is my wife, Dara.
Aloha.
And today, our special guest here is a dear friend of ours, Mr. Garrett Salpeter.
And our lifesaver, by the way. We'll get into that later on.
For sure.
Because that is worth mentioning for sure. That's how we divinely met.
Yeah. So before we kind of dive into that story and how our relationship developed from then, let's go ahead and take a moment to just introduce yourself, Garrett. Let's learn a little bit more about you, like what your background is, how you got started with an amazing business, NeuFit, an amazing invention as well. But yeah, go ahead and share some things about yourself.
Absolutely. Well, I'm excited to relive the day that we met here too, because it was a special day for me, and I've very much enjoyed getting to know the two of you over the last several years. So I'm really, really grateful to be on the show. And for everybody listening, yes, happy to tell you a little bit about myself as well. So my background is engineering and neuroscience, and I was also an athlete, and I became very passionate about physiology in the human body because I wanted to be a better hockey player, and I saw improving my body and my physical performance as sort of the most direct path to get there. And I ended up really falling in love with physiology in the body along the way there. And I'm grateful to have found, this through NeuFit and our business and what we're doing. So, sort of the place where the Venn diagram of all of those interests overlap, my sort of love of sports and the body and the engineering and the neuroscience. So I feel very grateful for that. And also, in terms of kind of how I got on this path, I think it's really interesting to share some of my story where I have an experience that a lot of people who start businesses or do different things that they're passionate about, have a similar story where they go through adversity, they solve a problem that they wanted solved for themselves, turn their pain into purpose. And for me, it was towards the end of my time in college where I was playing ice hockey and I had some torn ligaments. I was told I would need surgery. And in this context, I really believed that would be true because of my previous experiences with traditional orthopedic medicine, traditional physical therapy. I would describe it now as being very disempowering, disenfranchising, disenchanting. And, at one point I thought about being pre-med, but those experiences led me to believe there just wasn't anything down that road for me. So I ended up, following my interest in science and going physics major, pre-engineering student, and all that, right? But I had this experience towards the end of my time in college where I had some torn ligaments, was supposed to have surgery, and I met a doctor. It was a chiropractor who was doing functional neurology, so looking at the neurological response to injury instead of just the damage to the tissues, right? And looking at the autonomic nervous system, how it may or may not be supporting the healing process. And then he was also using older versions of direct current. So, think like an analog device with a bunch of dials on it and, kind of old school thing like that, right? But I had this amazing experience, being exposed to the nervous system and the healing properties of direct current electric fields literally helped me heal my ligaments, avoid surgery. I was so happy. I was elated as a hockey player, but as a pre-engineering student to find something that actually made sense about the body and the healing process, made sense scientifically from first principles. That's the part that really got me excited. And going through that whole experience really created within me this calling to share that type of work with as many people as I could. And so that sort of led me on this journey where I initially opened, a clinic in Austin, working underneath, a practice within a practice, working underneath another practice owner, using older versions of technology for 7 or 8 years, putting in my 10,000 hours, and then kept continuing to, sort of waiting for someone else to come out with better versions of that category of technology, and finally getting to the realization that, gosh darn it, I think I have to do it myself.
Wow, that is amazing.
Oh yeah, I mean, just sounds like you're just fulfilling the need, to be honest. Especially if it's not, it's not progressing in the way that you would want to at that moment, right? Mm-hmm. It's good at taking leadership on that role.
Yeah, I think that, for people listening, there may be some other practice owners or people who are your patients who also, do things in business or something like that. I think, one little entrepreneurial nugget for anyone so inclined is, if you can solve for other people a problem that you want solved yourself, that often is the seed of the best business, maybe not the best fit business that's going to be the best for you, that you'll have the passion for, that will give you the endurance and the stamina to see through the tough times and all that, right? Because there's certainly a lot of challenges along the way, but that's, to me, is sort of a big one of, if I can help solve the problem that I myself wanted solved. And so for me, it was what I perceived as the real frustrating lacks in the physical medicine space and the experiences I had with these other injuries. And so to see that contrast, that was so cool, that if I hadn't had those other negative experiences, I may not have felt as strongly about that more positive experience that I had too. So I think there's some interesting lessons in there upon reflection, right?
Yeah, and I mean, it brings us to how we first met you. I mean, we were in need in every way, and thankfully you were there. We were in the right place at the right time. I mean, we were injured. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the story on how we first met, because really to be honest, we didn't know much about NeuFit prior to us meeting you, right? And so how we meted you, we met at the biohacking conference. This was out in Beverly Hills, and there was an event at the time, and it was a way to get over your fear, right? Where there was a physical jump that was set up at the rooftop, and we participated in it. So it was it was like a 2.5 story platform where everybody was jumping into a stuntman bag, basically. We were like the last 50.
Yeah, we were close.
What I remember, it was getting late, it was getting dark, it was getting cold. The wind was picking up, and I just remember, some of the people running those stations just kind of walking around and saying like, okay, we got to wrap it up, like we got to get going. And so, the people who were manning the jump stations, they were just encouraging people, to jump. So I jumped, and immediately something felt off. I'm not an expert in jumping off of buildings. Like, this is not something I normally do. So it could have been, yes, me not jumping correctly. I don't know how to correctly jump off of a building. But immediately I felt my neck, like, not even crack, just crunch. And I bit through my bottom lip, and I had a hard time getting up. And so I remember it took me a while to get up, and in my head, I was going to, look up and tell David, okay, like, be careful, or, I should have, the first thought that should have came to my mind was don't jump. But as soon as I got off the pad, I heard him jump, and it was so scary because I looked up at the guy, and the guy looking down had this, his face was, he was just like, and I hated that feeling. And I climbed up on the pad, and David was not moving. He couldn't even breathe. And he could only look at me with, his eyes were just blinking rapidly, and he was trying to look at me. He couldn't even look at me. He couldn't speak to me. at this point, I honestly, I don't remember much, but I know people started gathering. Long story short, they were not much help. And so we had gone back downstairs. As we were walking back downstairs, I remember, David saying that his lower back is sore. So I lifted up his shirt and it literally looked like he was three months pregnant from his back. I mean, I didn't know what I was looking at. It wasn't okay. Thankfully, there was somebody there that helped us out that night. They had a pulse table. That was the first time we were introduced to a biocharger. We got through the night, and the very next day, we dragged ourselves back to the conference. And one of the first people we saw when we walked in was Rowena from Eng 3. And she looked at David and she was like, "Oh my God, what happened to you?" Yeah. So we explained to her, she's like, you need to go see my friend Garrett right now at NeuFit. And so we're like, okay, and we were just all discombobbled at this point. So she took us over to meet you, Garrett. And that was the first time we learned about the Neubie and NeuFit. And you were so gracious. And again, thank you so much, for hooking him up right away, working with him. I feel like he must have been there for almost.
I was there for a while, I remember.
Yeah.
And well, I mean, like, it's one of those things where, I've seen you at a number of the conferences, right, Garrett? And even previous to our engagement, if you will. And it's not that I didn't believe in it or anything. It was just like, oh, it's electrical stimulation.
Right.
Right. And so I was like, oh, we do this all the time. Right. So I know what this is about. So I'll just walk right past it.
Mm-hmm.
And, it wasn't until that moment where, I felt like, I know nothing,
Mm-hmm.
And I went in with an open mind on a recommendation from a good friend, right, from Rowena. And when we went there, to add to what Dara had to say, like, just how open you were, just to welcoming me in and Dara in, mm-hmm. in need and help. I was so grateful that you saw me, in despair.
Yeah.
And brought me forward. And I, that experience itself changed my life, in the sense of where my focus was on my business. And, we still utilize a number of different technologies here, but when I treat my patients alongside with what I do, in my manual therapy background, from the North American Institute of Manual Therapy, when I overlap it with a valuable tool such as the Neubie, it makes assessment and treatment so easy, I mean, I've done 10 plus years, or actually going on 20 years, actually. Who am I kidding, right? And in addition to using this technology, it totally changed the way that I looked at how I approach my clientele. And, some of the things that, that I've read through, with Garrett's book and just had conversations, within the training that we've done with him. And it made sense in the whole aspect of connecting with the software, right? And making sure that the software matches, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. Everybody's approaching the hardware approach, but it's got to make sense. You got to have this, this feedback loop has to be there. And, it really helped me to redefine, as I'm going through that healing process during that incident itself, really helped me to solidify what it is to really connect to your body. And I feel like, if you don't mind me saying this, Garrett, like direct current, having that experience with direct current itself gave me that perspective. And that's the only thing I can say objectively, because I've used, alternating current in regards to, healing, traditionally, and it's how I learned in school, right? And as well as TENS units, but it wasn't until using the Neubie where I began to understand the nervous system a little bit more from experience.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, does that kind of fall in line with the science that you're, that you tend to bring up in not just your book, but just in conversations with other, professionals and, all the places that you publicly speak at?
Yeah, there's so many things that you brought up there that I'd like to touch on. It's kind of interesting that the entry point into this for both of us here was our own injuries and being able to have that direct experience. So it is one of those things where the injury, the thing that seems like the worst thing in the world at the time, can be such a blessing. So I just an interesting parallel I just wanted to mention in passing there. But there's one part of your story that I think is just perfect. The perfect illustration of this point that feels to me like the biggest breakthrough and really the biggest opportunity to change physical therapy for the better. And that is, we have this misconception, this preconceived notion that when we have pain, it's because something is damaged or broken, that pain is a one-to-one response to hardware damage, right? Damage to the bone, muscle, tendon, ligament, disc, etc. And pain is not necessarily a one-to-one correlation with damage. Pain does not always mean damage. Pain is a response to perceived threat. And that perceived threat could be, it could be physical damage. It could also be, not getting enough sleep last night, being dehydrated, having an inflammatory reaction to food, having fear around the security of your job or your primary relationship or something like that. All these different things play into our experience of pain. And so there's that I want to leave that there for a moment, and then also talk about a big part of the reason why it takes so long for people to heal, whether it's you falling on this defective pillow that's supposed to be catching you and it doesn't, and you impact the ground and perhaps injure or irritate a disc or a nerve root in your lumbar spine or something like that, or if it's an athlete who has a sprained ankle or an AC separation in their shoulder. If there's when there's some sort of trauma to the body like that, yes, there may be hardware damage, and yes, it may take time to heal. And a big part of the reason that it takes so long to heal, so long to recover, that people are in pain for a period of time, for a longer period of time, a big part of that reason is not necessarily the original damage, but the response to that. It's like many times in life, it's not as much about what happens to us as about how we respond to it. And so the response component is really interesting here. And drilling down one layer deeper, if you think about it, our brains don't actually want us to do more. They don't want us to jump too high, run too fast, exert too much force, because our brains want to limit us so we don't get injured. Our brains are about inhibition and stopping us, not about getting us to do more. They don't want us to run out of energy. They want us to conserve energy in case there's a famine tomorrow. Anything, all those sorts of things. And so a lot of times this neurological response here is an overreaction. We have these neurological protective patterns like tension, locking down muscles, locking down areas of the body to restrict movement for fear of re-injuring or re-aggravating or further damaging that injured area. Muscle inhibition, shutting down muscles for the same reason. And then also this hypersensitivity in the perception of threat, which creates the output signal of pain from the brain and is the brain's way of saying, hey, don't do that, don't load that area. So you have these patterns, and some of that reaction, some of that pain, tightness, weakness, some of that is appropriate, but oftentimes it's excessive. It's actually more than is needed, and it slows down the healing process. And by going through our process here, harnessing the benefits of direct current, like you said, which we can get into, we can actually find where those neurological patterns are being imposed and help them recalibrate. Not so that they go away. The protective mechanisms are there for a reason, but so that they can recalibrate to appropriate levels. And when we do that, oftentimes it leads to these breakthroughs. Like your story is similar to the one I've seen several times, where someone, they quote unquote threw out their back and they're hobbling into the treatment room, just like you were kind of hobbling toward, to our booth at the biohacking conference. And, you're in this situation where it feels like something is very, very wrong, but there actually was just a relatively minor insult, a little bit of aggravation or irritation, on to the spinal cord or to the nerve root as it exits the spinal cord going down into the legs. And in response to that, relatively minor insult, the body hyper responds. And one of my favorite metaphors is to think about a reaction like if I'm here in my office and I see a big venomous rattlesnake coming into my office, whoa, for me to react like that is appropriate, right? Because it's mobilizing energy so I can run away or I can survey the scene and figure out how to protect and defend myself, right? That's appropriate. But now imagine if my 9-year-old daughter throws a cute little toy rubber snake in here and I react the same way, I'm overreacting, right? So that's not necessarily appropriate. And then I'm spending all that energy, ramping everything up, putting stress on the body when it's not productive or necessary or helpful. And we know about the effects of chronic stress, excessive stress on the body, the adverse effects of that. So if you're ramping up like that when you don't need to, that can be problematic. And so that's essentially a version of what was happening in your body as you were responding to that that injury from the fall there. And so we helped basically, by communicating with your nervous system in the unique way with direct current, finding where those protective patterns are being imposed, essentially helped your brain and nervous system see the information from that area of your body and understand, oh, hey, it's actually just a cute toy rubber snake. It's not a venomous snake. We can chill out. We don't have to protect and defend as much. And some people listening to that might wonder, well, what if there actually is real damage there? Like, you don't want to just work through that. And there are times where the damage is more severe and you don't get as much of a reduction in pain or as much freedom of movement and major increase in range of motion. So it's an opportunity to recalibrate, not override those protective mechanisms. So I think that's an important point to make. And then since you touched on it, is it worth taking a moment to kind of talk about some of the science and the background on direct current?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
So the history is actually very interesting. So part of what we're doing, I consider us at NeuFit the pioneers of direct current, and we're probably best known for being able to do this mapping process where we can scan around in the body and identify, like we just talked about, where the nervous system is guarding, inhibiting, has hypersensitivity, et cetera. And part of why we're able to do that is because of one of these two main effects, beneficial effects of direct current. But before I get into those, the history is kind of interesting, where these benefits that we'll talk about in a moment, these benefits of direct current were known back in the 1960s, 1970s. The Soviets did a lot of work with their athletes, and they found some really wonderful things. But they also found one big limitation, which was that when you turn the direct current up to a high enough level to make a difference in the body, have a therapeutic effect, it would actually literally burn the skin. And so they would leave burn marks on the skin of some of their athletes, and they could do it for Mother Russia back at the time. But of course, it didn't really translate well here in the West, and it fell out of favor. And so that's why for decades, like what you mentioned, learning in PT school about TENS units, and interferential and these other alternating current devices, that's what sort of came in and filled that void in this whole category of technology. And now we've been able to find ways to get direct current into the body to harness these benefits, which I know you're now on the edge of your seats here, so I'll tell you the benefits momentarily. But now we're able to get these benefits without stinging and burning the skin too. So that's some of the history there. So, okay, what are the benefits? Well, the first is when you get direct current, you have these electric fields that cause charges to move. So it's sort of like if you have a hill and there's a ball on top of the hill, it's going to roll down under the influence of gravity. Same thing, when you have an electric field, charges are going to move, positive charges towards the negative terminal and vice versa. And so this causes cells to move in a way that can, it can help circulation, but it can also influence the healing and regenerative processes in the body. We have a cool study that I can tell you about with diabetic neuropathy patients and actual nerve regeneration, where we compared direct current and alternating current side by side, saw virtually nothing with alternating current, big benefits with direct current, right? So there's some of these longer term benefits, but what most people think about when they think of the Neubie is this mapping process and these experiences, like you had, David, at that day, and like you, Dara, with your neck, these experiences where you actually feel better almost impossibly quickly. It's like, how is this making a difference in one session? I'm not used to it. So that speaks to the other category of benefits of direct current and why we've invested the time and energy and effort to to get direct current into the body at these levels and all that, that's because of the effect on the nervous system. So when you have an alternating current signal, as that signal goes back and forth, you end up getting muscular co-contractions. Muscles are fighting each other. So it's like if you were driving your car, you'd be hitting the throttle with one foot and holding down with the brake on the other foot. You'd be resisting and fighting your own movement. So you're sort of creating that dynamic in the body, and that becomes the limiting factor. Whereas with direct current, you can speak more powerfully and more precisely to the nervous system, especially the sensory input side of the nervous system. You can create the inputs that happen mimicking the same things that would happen if you're moving, if you're loading, stretching, lifting, etc. And that allows us then to do this testing to find where those protective patterns are being imposed and provide that signal to help accelerate that process of re-education, to help the brain and nervous system recalibrate and change function, very quickly. 91 to 92% of patients experience tangible, based on our data and these different studies and everything, right? Experience tangible progress in movement function and or reductions in pain in their first session on the machine. So I think there's a lot of low-hanging fruit here to really help people by working with the nervous system.
Yeah, and one of the things, through that experience, the first time that I had the Neubie put on me was, breaking through that belief of, if it hurts or if it's injured, rest it, don't use it. But you folks had me use my neck. And so that I think I had a little bit hard time wrapping my head around that in that moment, right when I was hooked up, and it was working. And yes, I was starting to feel better, like how you were saying, in a very short amount of time. And I was able to use my body after I wasn't, guarding, right, so much anymore. And yeah, when people, how you were saying, when people think of the Neubie, they think of mapping. And yes, like how he was saying, he uses that a lot here. But I think another way that people don't really realize, how we use the Neubie is for nervous system recalibration, right? How you're talking about like the trauma that like, for example, that came from, that injury for both of us, right? The trauma in that area and the guarding, right, in our nervous system. And there's a really cool mechanism that I use a lot with the Neubie, which is called the master reset. And I don't know if you folks want to talk about, a little bit about that. I had never experienced something like the master reset before. And that, how you were saying, the NeuFit really helped you to get feedback on how you're connected to your body.
Absolutely. When you use it in combination with even, just the NeuFit method itself, right? In assessment and treatment. When you're using the master reset, I noticed like a pretty significant difference. I mean, just with the NeuFit method alone, in addition to what I do, as I mentioned earlier, it was just kind of like, wow, man, like, can you imagine if everybody was doing this? Like, yeah. I share this with all my my classmates, that, especially the ones that I've done continuing education with, and it's just because we've studied the human body in general, especially the nervous system, in the most in-depth manner known to possibly mankind. I'm just kidding. Just within the physical therapy realm itself, like, the North American Institute of Manual Therapy, is known to be the most arduous, studying within manual therapy, in other words. Then later on, my mentor opened up Aspire, and, what's interesting is that, like, I can actually connect with the stuff that we were learning to what I was experiencing. And I was like, holy crap, this is amazing. Like, but more specifically, like, that balancing that occurs with, with a master reset was just life-changing. And, if you don't mind sharing just a little bit about that, Garrett, just kind of informing our listeners on what the master reset is itself.
Yeah, for sure. I'm glad you brought that up. And for everybody listening, these applications we've been talking about so far are more local. I talk about trying to find exactly where the nervous system is imposing these patterns of guarding and tension or inhibition and shutting down muscles, right? And this is more global. So where that the first approach and that mapping is more about precision, finding the right spots. This is more about creating a global shift in the autonomic nervous system. So autonomic nervous system, automatic nervous system, the unconsciously controlled parts that regulate organ function and blood flow and our heart and things like that. So everyone listening to your podcast is going to be aware of this notion of the sympathetic side of the nervous system, or the so-called fight or flight, where people are in a state of stress, and with our modern lifestyle we spend a lot more time than we need to in that state, and that can have very serious negative health consequences if we spend too much time in that state. That can lead to increased blood pressure, poor digestive and elimination function. It can lead to issues with reproductive organs, right? The autonomic nervous system controls all the visceral organs and reproductive organs. It's a problem for energy production and long-term vitality of the immune system, and all these things. And so it's important that we spend appropriate amounts of time in the other side of the autonomic nervous system, the parasympathetic, or the rest and digest, or feed and breed side, where the body is able to devote its resources to more long-term growth and repair projects. If we have to run from a predator to save our lives right now, repairing something for later, you can put that on the back burner, right? That's not important. So when we shift in that mode, that's when the body actually partitioning its resources actually sends resources to these longer-term growth and repair processes. And so you certainly spend time in that state. Most people do, and certainly should spend time in that state during sleep at night. Also important to have that, some time in that state during the day as well. So the master reset that Dara described there is our protocol. It's our version of, sort of a vagus nerve stimulation protocol, or sometimes we call it the electronic meditation also. So it's our version of that. And it's interesting because you have the pads on at the back of the neck and the balls of your feet. So the current's flowing through your whole body and also hitting these very neurologically rich places at the back of the neck and the balls of the feet. The feet are the main way in which we interact through the sense of touch with the world, right? Is our feet on the ground and the surface. There's a lot of nerves there. And you think about these traditions in reflexology and how, there's different reflex arcs and things like that from the feet. And then the neck, actually, the muscles in the back of the neck, not only is that where the vagus nerve leaves the brainstem and you're stimulating that directly, but also, these muscles here are the most neurologically dense, highest concentration of muscle spindles of any muscles in the body, because it's so important to sense the position of the head, to keep eyes on the horizon and balance, and the vestibular system aligned, and all these things. So you're getting, you're stimulating these areas. And the reason I'm able to say so confidently what I'm saying here about shifting into the parasympathetic nervous system, activating the rest and digest side, is that we have really wonderful data showing significant shifts in heart rate variability. So heart rate variability, many of your listeners will know this too. It's measured if people have the Whoop strap or BioStrap or Aura rings or Garmin's. Heart rate variability is a measure that you generally want to see it higher, because it's a marker of how far you shift into that parasympathetic rest and digest side of the nervous system. And so we've seen some really cool data where if you lie down and do diaphragmatic belly breathing for 10 to 20 minutes, you'll see an increase in heart rate variability, and that's wonderful. And certainly recommend that, right? And if you do that same 10 to 20 minute lying down belly breathing with the Neubie master reset on, the shift in heart rate variability, we've seen it be 3 or 4 or 5 times more significant. So you're taking something that's already good and beneficial and healthful and awesome, and just adding a 3 or 4 or 5 times amplifier on top of it to make that even more powerful and even more helpful for people to get into that healing state. And sometimes it helps people with chronic pain. Sometimes it helps people who are just stressed out from daily life and need to chill. Sometimes it helps people be recovering from various injuries or with neurodegenerative conditions. There's a variety of things, but just I really like that we're able to talk about this theme of the nervous system, because it really controls everything, right? It controls how we think, our energy, our filters through which we see the world, and our movement, and whether we have pain or don't, and how far we stretch, and how strong we are, and how well we perform cognitively and physically, and digest our food, and all that, right? So when you can create beneficial shifts in the nervous system, it has such a breadth of opportunity to positively affect so many areas of life and our experience.
I love that you called it the electrical meditation,
Mm-hmm.
because, and I think, David here prides himself on taking on a lot of the complex cases that so many doctors have looked at and still no results, no improvement, right? And sometimes when they come in, really all their body is allowing him to do is just the master reset, and it makes huge leaps and bounds.
And like it's a total total flip around from what they're used to.
Right.
Being told like, oh, how are you going to get through this? Just do more exercise.
Right.
And it's not, you can't fix everything with a hammer.
Mm-hmm.
So having this in your tool belt, if you will, toolbox, as just a way to kind of help kind of narrow the field is what I'm looking at. Kind of bringing down that heightened response, as you mentioned earlier, right? Gives us a little bit more of a focus, not as a practitioner, but also as yourself, as a patient. Like, what am I experiencing at this moment, right? Because most of us will be clouded with all of this other stuff that's going on, right? We've even used this mastery reset within a spiritual setting,
yeah,
and have noticed significant results to help people with, managing, a lot of the things that they're working through at that moment through those energy healing sessions.
Mm-hmm.
Like we literally use these technologies to support people's energy, as much as, to balance out. Right?
Yeah. And to, bring up a point that you were talking about, Garrett, how much the nervous system plays a part in our healing, even physically, right? Or how much that pain response most of the time is not something physical. Right? Like when we talk about some of these retreats, right? The energy healing stuff, when they just talking about some traumas or experiences, pain will physically come up in their body. Mm-hmm. And we're so, so grateful to have something like the Neubie here to support their physical body through those, transitions, I'll say, through those. Yeah.
And if you don't mind me, adding a shameless plug on the Neubie, it's amazing because there's nothing that has this amount of power in the sense of like, Garrett knows that I experiment quite a lot, but I like to use, one half of the machine, as a master reset, and simultaneously, like, because these people are holding things and they're like, oh my God, this pain in my shoulder or this pain in my pelvis. And yeah, we'll make it a little bit more focused in these areas. Right. I'll do a little bit of a combination of things where we'll target these areas, but we'll still do a mastery reset, and, when we're doing impactful things and intentional things like that, it's almost like a cheat to have this Neubie, but, as we're talking about these things during these specific types of retreats, this is where we store things, in our nervous system. We're so sophisticated, the human nervous system itself, that we're able to store these things literally in our body. Our brain is that sophisticated, as I mentioned,
Well, and that's stubborn, like how you were talking about earlier, right? Like how the brain does not want you to change, doesn't want you to work harder, doesn't want you to do something different, because that's going to mean that there's something physically changing in the brain, and the body doesn't want to do that.
Yeah, I think that there's a really interesting theme there that I just want to sort of call out and highlight. A couple things that you said there. So, one is, yes, the brain really, it works on systems of pattern recognition, and so it wants to be able to know what's coming, to see things that are familiar. Anything that's unfamiliar is perceived as threatening and therefore dangerous, and that's why people can stay in toxic relationships, even if they don't consciously want it. They just stay with it because it feels familiar. It's like the devil you know is better than the devil you don't, sort of metaphor, right? So there's that. And then if you talk about like people having spiritual experiences, if you talk about someone either experiencing a memory of something bad, or thinking about something that they may want that they don't have yet. If that's unfamiliar, that can be scary. And if you think about, it's very similar. It's very analogous to this process of, if you're in that back spasm and you're trying to bend forward, that's perceived as really threatening and scary. And so your brain says, no, stop. But if you send that signal to be more parasympathetic, to downregulate that guarding overall, you can go farther into that movement with less resistance. And I think it's an analogous, scenario, analogous type of application to say, if you have a similar fear response to a thought or a projection into the future, if you can also create that calming effect neurologically, then you can sort of go further into that image or that projection of the future, just the same as you can go further into that bending forward movement sort of thing. So I think there are. I'm glad you're bringing this up, because I think there are some strong connections, and that's something that I'm sort of fascinated by and very intrigued with the applications in this realm of physiological psychology or some of these other areas too. I think there are a lot of applications there.
I mean, we've seen this.
Yeah.
We've witnessed this actually, literally like maybe a month ago, right? When we had our one of our retreats, and it was very interesting to see, and in the way that individuals just felt. I mean, we obviously create a space of feeling comfortable, but by the time hours went by. In other words, during this retreat, we just saw people start to become just very different. Like their faces changed, like the skin color changes, and their the conversations that we were having were very, very much more than just surface level. In other words, which was so good, and I felt like having the Neubie there as a one of our tools to help people, to support their energy. I mean, just made a huge impact.
Well, and even outside of the retreat, I mean, I will witness, his patients just laying there and all of a sudden start crying.
Oh, that happens very common.
They didn't really even share anything deep with him, right? Except for my shoulder hurts, my back hurts, my neck hurts, and he will hook them up to the master reset, and they'll just start crying, right? Or they fall asleep and they wake up and they tell him, "Oh my God, I haven't slept like that in 2 months," or something. And so really, to me, yes, this is a machine, but it's a very intuitive machine. And we don't have a machine in here like that. And that, honestly, for everything, physical pain, emotional pain, really, the Neubie is like our go-to. And even personally.
Which I will say, though, in addition to that, though, I mean, training is extremely important with
yes.
it.
Yes.
Like knowing, it's having a tool like this is one thing, but knowing how to use it specifically and just being intentional with how you use it, makes it, extremely important. I mean, with great power comes great responsibility, right? That's what Spider-Man said.
That's right. And
sorry, I went nerdy on that one, but or Stanley, if you will. But anyway,
I love what you said there, Dara, about how it feels like more intuitive or to that effect. I love that for a couple reasons. One is, I mentioned some of the engineering behind it. Of course, that that's part of my background and part of that I was passionate about, really improving and things like that. But really, the biggest goal in engineering this was to create a signal that matched or mimicked as closely as possible the same endogenous, neurological signals that we send naturally on our own with the least amount of interference. So, I'm glad to hear you say that, because to me that sort of validates that we achieved that goal of creating something that is sort of like an outside complement to our internal nervous system. It signals the same types of information to be sent and different things like that. So I like that. And then I also think it's important to bring up, this notion where a lot of people think that if we want to get back to nature, there's sort of a false dichotomy between nature and technology. And yes, there are things that we've done in this technological age that have harmed our environment and nature. And so I'm not defending anything and everything and saying technology at all costs by any means. But I am saying that it is possible to use technology to, in a way that complements and supports and actually activates the natural healing that we have within the body. So it's not necessarily about replacing anything, but it's about activating that which is already inside of us. And we live in environments that are somewhat unnatural, and so sometimes having to use something else to counteract that, might make sense. But I love the way you said that, and I felt compelled to sort of share those couple points also.
I also love that it is very mobile. So it has given us an opportunity to think of other events that are outside, like how you were saying.
Oh,
right?
For sure. Yeah.
Get back to nature. And really, what we're talking about, right? We talked about this in our other podcast, was about the frequency. And that's what I do feel like, the NeuFit in certain settings, like the Master Reset, does mimic a certain frequency that helps us to connect more with Earth, with Mother Earth.
And I love that. You can dial specifically, you can dial in, to these different frequencies. You can get as specific as you want, and, just kind of touching back on the training part, the more, you want to learn more about it as a practitioner, like the more education you get in it, the more tools you got, man. So, that's one of the things I'm grateful for, that you offer, Garrett, is just this continuing education type of modules, that just give us so much more, as practitioners in general, more than just PTs. I feel like this overlaps with a lot of, professions that choose to be in the healing environment, right?
Yeah. Well, thank you.
And so
I appreciate that. And also we'll shout out a few of the clinicians on our team. We've got a couple of wonderful physical therapists, and Ramona is our PhD neuroscientist who runs our research and clinical education, clinical affairs, and that's been one of the coolest things about this is, I had a sense, really an intuitive sense that sort of, if you build it, they will come. If I can get this thing out there and it can have these wonderful, positive, transformative effects in the world, good things will happen. And they have, and they've happened through, great people. You are the first clinic, in the state of Hawaii, right, anywhere on the islands to be using this. And you're working with people that, we never would work with in Austin, Texas, right? And then also, to be able to collaborate with people that have other experience and expertise and are able to take these neurological principles and this technology and apply it to new applications, whether it be in working with MS and neuropathy patients, or pelvic floor applications, or these different things that we have modules on. But it's been really cool to be able to sort of see the applications expand and the knowledge base expand, both with our internal team and also collaborating with other practitioners around the country and even now around the world. It's been really, just really humbling and exciting and gratifying to see all that.
Yeah, there's so much to look forward to as we grow with you, Garrett. So a couple of things I want to also mention too. Some of the things that we want to make sure that we bring to light are the terms that we like to use, the words, the vocabulary that we utilize a lot, and the word sanative or sanative comes up. And for those listeners that don't know, and have listening for the first time, sanative or sanative in the sense of healing, through connection, and that's where our center point of our practice, of our organization, of our podcast, if you will, revolves around sanative connection. And like if you were to talk a little bit about sanative connection, would we be able to have conversation on like who is this that you are having sanative connections, or and what does that look like for you?
There's quite a few. It's definitely if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Right? It's definitely true. Certainly all the support of my my family and everything is wonderful. And then, something that's been, and these opportunities to collaborate with new people, that I mentioned, has been just, really amazing. One of the biggest things in the last year or two that has changed for me, that's been really, sort of liberating and I think healing for me is, I had there's along the entrepreneurial journey, there's been a few times where I've had to really change my identity in a way that, like we talked about, it's unfamiliar, it's uncomfortable, and it's scary, because our brains like familiar. And there was one several years ago when I mentioned that I was in the clinic. I was full time, day to day, working with people, and really got a lot of my sense of self worth from actually creating these positive experiences with people, helping them heal and achieve their goals, and have these aha moments and these wonderful experiences. And then I had to realize I had to give that up if I wanted to share this with tens of thousands of people. Working one-on-one all day long was sort of a bottleneck in that process, right? So I went through, with the help of some mentors and other people on our team at the time, went through that transition to become more focused on setting the direction of the business, getting more out of that day to day. And then that's 7 or 8 years ago now, going through that. And then in the last year or two, I feel like I've had the next level, sort of the next course of evolution, identity shift, where I was still sort of doing a lot. And I feel like in the last year or two, we've had a really wonderful dynamic with our leadership team here, where I feel like they've got it. Whether it be sales, whether it be the person overseeing operations and quality management. The woman I mentioned earlier, who's runs our research and clinical education, clinical affairs. Really feeling like they've got it, and I can focus on the few things that I'm doing in terms of innovation and being able to have opportunities like this to go on your podcast or speak at events or host our own podcast, which David has been on. I'll plug ours as well. You were back on like our first 10 episodes. It was really good. I didn't know how to host a podcast yet, but I feel there was a period of time where I was like, I love what I'm doing, but it feels like such a grind. I can kind of see why people would sell their business or something like that, because I felt like so much was falling on me. And now with this dynamic that we have, where I feel like I can really trust and lean on the other leaders on our team and things like that, I feel like, oh hey, I don't feel as overwhelmed. There's ups and downs, and there's a lot of shit that comes up. Pardon my language. And there's a lot of there's stressful and challenging times, yes, for sure. But I feel like I can be more focused in the parts that I enjoy, that I choose to focus on, knowing the other stuff is taken care of. And it's a really wonderful dynamic. And now I'm like, I feel like I could continue to do this and enjoy it. And yes, there's pain along the way, but that leads to growth. And just really that sense of evolving there, in the business. And that feels so personally exciting to me, because I think this business is not only a vehicle for growth, but it's my vehicle to really be of service and make be the change that we wish to see in the world here. So I don't know if that's necessarily what anyone was thinking would come from that answer, but
that was beautiful
to me right there.
No, we purposely leave that question so open-ended because it can look like anything to anyone. And having community and support, in the way that you were mentioning is the ultimate. It's healing. To be able to not have that undue stress. Yeah. Right. Of like, shoot, is this going to be done? Or like looking at your schedule, like, oh my gosh, I have all of this stuff to do, or these people to see. And not that you hate it. It's just your plate's full, And so like having support, from what I'm hearing, is healing.
Well, and really, if you didn't give up that one-on-one, right, we wouldn't have been able to experience your wonderful technology, right? So, before we wrap up, we really want to personally thank you. It's saved our life.
Oh yeah.
For one.
Sure.
Right. For sure. I don't think, I think people are hearing the story like it sounds horrible. No, it was worse than how than the story that I shared. It was horrible. We weren't home. Our kids were young.
Oh yeah.
We didn't know how we were going to get on the plane.
Situation.
It was a situation. So we personally want to thank you for saving our life, but also for really helping us to evolve our business and get really intentional on how to really help people. Physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, right? And how we were talking about, it all works together.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. And as we go along, I mean, we didn't know we were going to be able to use your Neubie in our retreats.
No, yeah.
Right.
But it felt so natural to do so, though.
Yeah. And so we're gonna, it's allowing us to continue to evolve more things and more ways that we can help people. Yeah. So thank you.
I appreciate that very much. I appreciate that very, very much. And I know that whatever seeds were planted in our interactions, they would not have grown so well if not for being planted in such fertile soil. So you two are, really already doing wonderful work. And are just such great people, and with wonderful intentions that I'm so grateful the Neubie found its way into your hands, and you're able to use it with the people there in Hawaii. And I can't wait to come and see your new space in person, also.
Yes.
Real quick though, Garrett, before we leave, I want to make sure that we answer this question, and it's the title of our podcast, Optimize Your Naʻau, right? And Naʻau meaning where our source of life is, our intuitiveness, our connection with body and mind, our our mind to our soul, right? It translates literally to our insides as well, our organs and whatnot. But we as Hawaiians and as a culture, we have different meanings over different words, but more importantly, names, right? And so what we wanted to do is make sure that we covered, our title of our podcast, which is Optimize Your Naʻau. And so the question to you is, how do you optimize your naʻau?
There's a few parts to that, and we could do a whole other podcast episode. I'm very passionate about this. But, I mean, I'm very grateful for several of the habits that I have, because when I do go through challenging times, they sort of give me the energy, the resilience, the stamina to get through it. But spending time outside in nature, we sort of touched on a little bit. Really having a healthy circadian rhythm, has helped me a lot. I'm certainly diligent about my nutrition. I sort of look at everything through the lens of energy. I think if I have the energy to do what I want to do during the day and have some left over, so I can not feel fatigued, or I could go out late one night if I wanted to, which I end up doing very rarely, but maybe there's a concert or something, and then so I look at it through the lens of really optimizing energy. And there's these impactful lifestyle practices that you certainly teach and talk about here. So I won't belabor, but certainly circadian rhythm, nutrition, and then a lot of exercise and movement, just staying moving. Never really getting stagnant for too long. And then I think those are all important. And one of the biggest learnings for me in the last couple of years is really paying attention to the more subjective side of energy. I have a good friend. I don't know if you know Wesley Kress. He uses the Neubie in the Phoenix area, and he was also a recent guest on my podcast. And whenever I'm in Phoenix, I try to see him. Last time we sat and talked for 3.5 hours over lunch. And so his background is actually acupuncture, traditional Chinese medicine. And so he talks a lot about yin and yang, and he finally explained it to me in a way that where it really landed and made sense. He talks about one as sort of contraction, one as expansion. And you could look at them as sympathetic and parasympathetic, male and female, these sort of opposing polar forces here. And one of the interesting things for me in the last few years is I have shifted. I'm still definitely more of an intellectual guy, but I've shifted more from just thinking about everything intellectually to trusting my feelings more and more. I've had experiences where I look back and reflect and think, oh, if I had trusted that feeling, I would have made a better decision, or I would have gotten to the right decision faster. So I sort of learned it, and I really sort of, if I'm evaluating something, really feeling that sense of what creates within me a greater sense of expansion or a greater sense of contraction, and sort of using that as a decision-making guideline of really moving in a direction of greater expansion. That's sort of been my working hypothesis in the last year or two, and it seems to be paying off so far. So that's been sort of my big, yes, the lifestyle basics are important, but so much of our experience, so much of life is really our subjective experience and our perspective and how we think about things and how we feel about things, and that you kind of using that filter, focusing on that more. There's probably a lot of people listening are like, yeah, I've been that way since I was a kid, but it took me a while to learn. Okay.
Listen, we're still doing the work. So we resonate so much on everything that you just said. And thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, no, that was, that totally resonates with all of us.
Yeah. And
Thank you. I'm glad.
You just spoke the truth, Garrett.
Absolutely. Many people struggle with just getting in intelligence in general, so.
Well, it's a perspective, right? It is. Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, we want to say thank you again. Anything on the horizons future-wise that we should be on the lookout for?
Let's see.
If it's secret, it's okay.
Well, I mentioned this neuropathy study. So we finished, and at the time we're having this conversation, we have this study submitted for publication, peer review, scientific journal article review process. So we should be able to have that out, at some point in the months following the release of this podcast, which I'll be really excited about, because that shows some of the regenerative healing powers of direct current. And there were hints and glimpses of this in animal models and different studies. And this, at least to my knowledge, is one of the first, perhaps the first, showing really significant regeneration in human tissues. This is, peripheral nerves of diabetic neuropathy patients in their 70s, when it's been written off they could ever heal in any meaningful way. So once this is out, I believe we'll be able to have some really compelling programs that you could offer in your clinic, others could offer in their clinics, or patients listening. If you or any loved ones have neuropathy, there's going to be some really exciting opportunities to actually get some healing instead of just palliative care, symptom management, right? Whatever else is out there. So that's one that I learned recently. I didn't realize how many tens of millions of people in this country alone have it, how big of a problem it is, how terrible the treatments are. So I've gotten passionate about it in the last couple of years, and especially seeing this study, I'm really, really excited to share that. So that's one I'll throw out there for sure.
Right on. No, I love that. I'm excited. We'll be keep our eye on that.
Yeah.
For sure.
And so how can people learn more about NeuFit and Neubie and about you? You have a website? Are you folks on Instagram?
Yes, definitely. So our website is www.neu.fit. It's NEU.FIT. My book,
just like your shirt,
just like my shirt. Yeah. If you're listening, you don't see it. If you're watching, you do. But if you're listening, it's in AC/DC style font. I talk about the difference between alternating current and direct current. So this is my favorite shirt. If you're on Amazon, my book is the NeuFit Method. There's a written book and also audio book. And then if you're on Instagram, our business page is NeuFit RFP for rehab, fitness, and performance. And then I just in the last few months started a personal page also. So been on that more, sharing some more content. My personal page, my first and last name, Garrett.Salpeter. And I would love to interact with any of you. Any friend of David and Dara's is a friend of mine. So I'd love to see you on social media.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Garrett.
Mahalo, Garrett.
Great.
And, we'll see more of each other in the future.
Absolutely.
Yes, for sure.
Thanks again. I'll see you again.
Thank you both.
Aloha.
Aloha.